It's a joy sharing our times together in all the different ways we do, really getting a sense of spiritual community, of building a place where we know we are accepted just the way we are, loved just the way we are, and that there's a potential in all of us that is divine and wonderful and great and good, that we help each other recognize in ourselves and all of us here and all those around us in our lives. We are going to start, as we do, those of you that come regularly to the service know that we start with lighting our candle. So if you have a candle with you, if you don't, just appreciate and enjoy everybody else's, don't worry. But if you've got a candle that you'd like to light, let's take a moment to do that now. It's a very conscious act, lighting our candle. It kind of represents the beginning of this sacred time together, our divinity, the light within us. We say, the Christ in me beholds the Christ in you. The light in me beholds the light in you. And so we take a moment just to acknowledge that and to see that in each other's eyes, because even on Zoom, we can still see each other's faces and connect with our candles, connect with the energy that we are. So let's just take a moment before we go into our daily word reading read by Sally, just to get still. Let us consciously, for ourselves, open our eyes that we may see the Spirit of truth here with us now. That we open our ears to hear words of wisdom and understanding that bring illumination, that guide and direct us. And we open our hearts to the love of God, which is in all and through all, expressing here as each of us present today. We open our eyes, our ears, our hearts to all that God is. And let that energy divine, spirit within, direct us, fill us, and become us.
Thank you, Kimmery. We've got a beautiful daily word today. Living from my divine nature frees me. Sometimes I feel limited when I don't think I have enough time, money, space, education, or experience. These thoughts can occupy so much space in my mind that I begin to think limitation is the truth of life. The greater truth is that I am free and unlimited in spirit. Alive in God, I am free to express all the love, wisdom, and strength of the divine as only I can. The greater truth is that I am free and unlimited in spirit. Alive in God, I am free to express all the love, wisdom, and strength of the divine as only I can. What joy and liberation it is to know that nothing can separate me from my true spiritual nature. If I believe any circumstance in my life or any of my past actions obstruct or delay my spiritual progress, I now release that belief, embracing and living from the divine presence, the Christ within me. I claim freedom from all limitation. And this beautiful line from Acts, in him we live and move and have our being. So let's go back to the affirmation at the top of the page and say it 3 times. Once, living from my divine nature, then living from your divine nature, and then living from our divine nature. So together, living from my divine nature frees me. Living from your divine nature frees you. Living from our divine nature frees us. And so it is.
And what I want to do this afternoon is just look a bit closer at the daily word. And if we look at the affirmation, living from divine nature frees me, that sort of comes in 3 parts there. First of all, there's this point about freeing me. And I'm going to talk about this later, and it's going to talk about it in terms of an aspect of consciousness. In the sort of the pre-meeting we had today, where a lot of people shared how they came to Unity, there was a lot of talk about consciousness and about things flowing from consciousness. So we'll talk about that a bit more. Living from my divine nature. So we'll talk about divine nature. And of course, as far as Unity is concerned, divine nature is oneness. That's really what it is, to sum it up in one word. I'll also talk about living, because living is one of those words that almost gets thrown into a sentence without thinking about it. But I'd like us to think about that. Because living is our life experience, and our life experience flows from our consciousness. And for my message this afternoon, I'd like to go back to an old daily word, and I regret the fact that I don't have the date of it, but it's something, an affirmation that I use in my morning meditation, very similar to the one we've got today, but I find it a little easier to remember, and that's, through forgiveness, I am free. I am free. That's a message of release. And for me, it's about releasing thoughts that do not serve me. I try these days not to make things wrong, but I do identify things that don't serve me. And those things I try to release. But where I'd like to start actually is with the Bible reading, because sometimes in Daily Word, the Bible reading is sort of a little add-on at the end. And this one's actually quite interesting because it comes from the time when Paul was in Athens, and Paul was strolling around Athens, and he was noticing that there were idols around the place, and there was even an altar to an unknown god. And so he started talking to a lot of people, and he was talking, for instance, to some Epicurean and Stoic philosophers, and they were saying, "What does this babbler want to say?" They didn't understand him. So they took him off to Areopagus, sorry. Now, when I first read that, I thought Areopagus was a person, but of course it's not. I now know it's a hill. It's a hill in Athens, not far from the Acropolis. And the Areopagans were the local sort of city judicial council. And being Athens, being the Greeks, they were very much into philosophy and poetry and all that sort of thing. So they brought Paul up there and got Paul to speak to these council people. Now, we know that Paul was a pretty smart guy. He did some interesting things in his life, but above all else, he was a pretty smart guy. And the way he went about talking to them was actually try to talk to them in their own culture. So this wonderful reading we've got, "In him we live and move and have our being," Paul didn't say that. He repeated it, but it actually comes from a chap called Epimenides, who was a 6th century BCE Greek philosopher. So he was using this way of talking to them by referencing their own people so they could understand what he was saying actually should mean something to them. And it's interesting because, of course, Paul spent his time talking in the diaspora, all the places that weren't in and around Israel. And it's interesting that this 6th century prophet was actually, it's not prophet, philosopher, was giving a message of oneness. So already in Athens, they had this message of oneness. And that's what we're talking about today. But if we go back to the start of this daily word, Then it talks about limitation, as Sally was saying. Sometimes I feel limited. I begin to think limitation is the truth of life. It isn't the truth of life. It is absolutely almost 180 out from the truth of life. It's simply an idea we have in consciousness. Everything comes from our ideas in consciousness. But in this case, I mean, Unity talks about 3 layers of consciousness. We won't go into that, but the subconscious is the place that stores up every feeling, every experience we've ever had. And it contains at any point in time kind of our own understanding of who we think we are. And that's down to us. Sometimes referred to, or I sometimes refer to it as the prison of our own thinking. And there was a very similar daily word on the 26th of August. And the affirmation there was, I forgive and I'm set free. So very similar. But what it says is withholding forgiveness is like locking myself in a prison cell and holding the key. I hold the key. I don't only create this prison, I hold the key to it. I may think I'm punishing another, but in truth, I'm punishing myself. So today I choose to free myself from the prison of my own making. Limitation is something we can free ourselves from. So let's look at those 3 aspects in the affirmation of today's daily word. And let's start with living. What is living? Well, the place we go typically as sort of teachers in Unity, if we want to understand what something means, is a little book called Revealing Word, which was written by Charles Fillmore. And he defines life as the expression of being. The expression of being. The expression of what I hold in my consciousness at any particular time. So wherever my consciousness is, that's what I'm expressing, and that is my life. And that's my choice. So if my choice is to allow the Christ within to flow through, then limitation disappears. Jesus, our way shower, was the wonderful example of how if I allow the Christ within to shine through, then my life is an expression of my truth. Also in Unity, we talk about things called the 12 powers, and one of those powers is life. And the power of life is this energizing force that comes through from spirit, and I can use that energizing force to energize any thought I have and bring it into my personal reality, my personal experience. So life is what I draw through and give to what's in my consciousness to create my life experience. Eric Butterworth, for me, probably the greatest Unity writer there's been. It's a personal preference. He says in his book, In the Flow of Life, which Beth mentioned earlier in our sort of pre-meeting, he says life can be looked upon in 2 different ways. We can either look upon it as the sum of our experiences, and that's our subconscious that I mentioned before, our subconscious prison, or we can look upon it as infinite potential. Infinite potential. Wow. Luke 17:21 tells us the kingdom of God is within us. That's what's within us. That's what gives us the infinite potential. Emmett Fox, another great writer, says life is consciousness. Experience is the expression of my consciousness. So that's what life is. My life, what I experience, is the consciousness that I express at any given time. And so our affirmation says, living from my divine nature. So what's divine nature? Well, we can look upon it as divine mind. And divine mind is the absolute. It is oneness. It is within us. It is the Christ within. That is my divine nature. I don't know about you guys, but most of my time, I don't seem to actually latch into that all enough. You know, I've got all this nonsense going on. And that was the first bit of the, the first paragraph of Daily Word about all these limitations, I think. I've got all this nonsense going on. If I can let that go, if I can allow that Christ within, then that is my divine nature. So if my life is the expression of my consciousness and my divine nature is this wonderful thing, if I allow that to express, then what do I get? It says it frees me. I get freedom. Freedom. Revealing Word again tells us that freedom is living from principle. Principle is the Christ within. That's what freedom is. And it says it's complete well-being. Wow. Complete well-being. If I allow my expression to come from divine nature, I get complete well-being in communion with the Christ within. And the way I do that is through forgiveness, letting go. Emmett Fox, in his lovely little pamphlet called The Golden Key, says, anytime you've got a challenge, just lay the challenge to one side, and in the quaint old English saying, think on God. Just think God. If I'm thinking God, if I'm thinking the Christ presence, I can't think any of the problems. I can't. So I can't think two things at one time. So if I'm thinking on God, the problem must go away. Eric Butterworth tells us that this consciousness, this flow, it's a flow from within. It flows from within to without. And my life is the experience of that flow. It's the same thing. It's that flow of consciousness. If it's the flow of the Christ within, then that's what I experience. And that's what makes me free. I am free. Said in Daily Word, I am free and unlimited in spirit. I am free to express all, it says all the love, wisdom and strength of the divine as only I can. Wow. I got to realize this a number of years ago. I've told my story about my redundancy lots of times, so I'm not going to say that. But when I found myself stuck in a difficult position, I started a meditation practice. I started a meditation and prayer practice, which I do every day. And when one's in that space, when one, as the Golden Key says, focus on the Christ within, I experience that flow. The proof is in the pudding. A friend of ours, Dorothy, who's a wonderful musician, lent Kimry a book called Honesty Over Silence. It's a more traditional Christian book, but in it has a fabulous story. A story of a lady called Rachel Wright, who's got her own website if you want to have a look it up. She got pregnant, and just as she was coming due, all motion stopped within her. And so she was taken to hospital. She had an emergency cesarean, and this baby was born, young Sam, that wasn't going to live. The doctors were absolutely convinced he wasn't going to live. And so after she had a cesarean operation to deliver him. And of course, she was limited in her ability to move around, but the cot was in the corner of the room where she was recovering. And in the middle of the night, she saw a figure and touch the child. That child suffered cerebral palsy and has had a very challenging life. But she writes, and the reason I'm giving this example is, and this was a bit later on, but she said, right then, I chose to try to continue down the road of acceptance, to hope and freedom, even when it didn't make sense. Even when in the adversity she was facing, she chose to continue down the road of acceptance to hope and freedom. She's actually written her own book called The Skies I'm Under, should you wish to see that. But so coming back to the message I wanted to put over this afternoon. Matthew 6:3 tells us, strive first for the kingdom. And Luke has already told us the kingdom of God is within you. Find that kingdom. The message is because through forgiveness, through releasing, through letting go, as this lady did with this young baby, through forgiveness, I am free. And where I'd like to finish this afternoon is I'm going to read something out from Eric's book, In the Flow of Life. I'm not going to do this as a meditation, but one could use it as a meditation. I just want to read it out. And it says, let your mind and heart release all that disturbs you. Let your body be still, and all the frettings of your body, and all that surrounds it. Let the earth and sea and air be still, and heaven itself. And think of spirit as streaming, pouring, rushing, and shining into you, through you, and out from you in all directions while you sit quiet. Eric didn't write that. Eric paraphrased it from Plotinus. Plotinus was a 3rd century Greek philosopher. So back we are in Athens.
So thank you very much, Paul, for all of that, and for Sally and all of you that have taken part in the service. Every time, every moment we experience with you is a blessing. It lifts us higher somehow. It is about building spiritual community, and it's also about recognizing that this light that is within us, that we see in each other in a safe environment where we're encouraged to know more fully who we are, we take that light out into the world and share that light and share that understanding and share that energy in all that we're witnessing around us. And in these times where everything seems to be kicking off and so much going on that it's impossible to understand how we can make a difference, we do make a difference when we shine our light, when we be that expression of love, when we connect with others in the best way that we can, when we live from our divine nature. And let's take a moment just to bless Paul, to bless Sally, to bless all of us here this afternoon, to bless and say thank you to Unity and all that we share together. Divine love expressing through me and as me, blesses and multiplies all that I have, all that I give, all that I receive, and my awareness of all that I am. So take a moment, breathe. Close your eyes if you wish to. Take in as much as you can of what's been shared today. And we'll close with our unity prayer for protection and invite you to join in saying this prayer as we close our time together this afternoon. The light of God surrounds us. The love of God enfolds us. The power of God protects us. The presence of God watches over us. Wherever we are, God is, and all is well.